Afternoon and welcome to the California Transit Association's 2025 end of session legislative wrap up. I am Michael Pimentel, Executive Director of the California Transit Association, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues and your legislative advocates, Matt Robinson and Brendan Rapicki. During today's webinar, as we click to the next slide, we will be going over the fiscal year 25-26 state budget, the sponsored and priority legislation we pursued or were engaged on as an association, and a brief overview of the state's Transit Transformation Task Force. Before we get underway on those substantive reports, we are going to provide you with a brief overview of webinar logistics, identifying for you how you can ask questions as part of this discussion. And for that, I'll turn things over to my colleague, Brendan Rapicki.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. As you can see here, and it should be pretty intuitive, ask a question using the Q&A panel on your screen. Ask a question at any time, but we will have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, and we'll answer questions there. As you can see, do our best to address as many as possible. I'm sure we'll be able to get to them all, but obviously depends on time and how many questions we get. And so I'm gonna actually now turn it back over to Michael to give a recap on how the budget process went for the association and our members in the year 2025.
And thank you, Brendan. So members, as we begin, we do want to start with a bit of historical background, historical context for where we were this past year. And so on January 10th, Governor Newsom released his proposed fiscal year 25-26 state budget. That budget presented some good news for California. After years of budget deficit, the state was projecting a minor budget surplus of $363 million. Now, unfortunately, in the months that followed the release of the budget, we experienced a number of national and state level events that resulted in a significantly worsened state budget outlook that ultimately resulted in revision to the state's budget with the release of the May revise and the projection of a $12 billion state budget deficit. Now, to address that state budget deficit, the governor in May proposed a series of new cuts, a series of new budget maneuvers, including borrowing, fund shifts, and access to the state's rainy day fund to ultimately move the state into a balanced budget. So on the next slide, you'll see precisely one of the main proposals that was included within the budget, and that is the governor's proposal for cap and invest. Now, alongside the May revise, the governor had proposed this fairly significant policy recommendation to extend the state's cap and trade program through 2045 and to rename it the Cap and Invest program. Now, as part of that proposal, he also proposed to reset in 2025 the historic Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund expenditure plan. That expenditure plan had been in place since 2014, and to direct the new expenditure plan to two line items of investment, proposed $1 billion for the state's high-speed rail program, and a proposed $1.5 billion investment for operational expenses at CAL FIRE. Now, with that proposal and his recommendation to reset the cap and trade expenditure plan, what we did find newly at risk were the state's historic investments from the GGRF in transit programs, including continuous TIRCP, that's the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, continuous LCTOP, that's the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, as well as one-time monies that were provided to us in 2023 pursuant to SB 125, those funds being the formula TIRCP and the formula ZETCP, that's the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. So in response to the governor's cap and trade proposal, we as an association, in concert with our membership, mobilized to push back on what we saw as significant risk and potential cuts to core transit funding programs. On your screen, you'll see a variety of the mechanisms in which we engage you all as our members, engage the broader stakeholder community to raise concerns about the governor's proposal and to call for the legislature to reject the governor's proposal to reset the cap and trade expenditure plan and to maintain our investments for both continuous and one-time programs. And on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the various ways in which we were engaged on your behalf here in the state capitol. Now, on the next slide, you'll see the ways in which we look to then elevate for the broader public, for local stakeholders, the impact of the governor's proposal, and to, again, drive us toward the maintenance of our programs. As an association, we oversaw a robust op-ed program. We drove toward earned media and earned press coverage. And then we launched a paid digital advocacy campaign that sought to raise awareness of the importance of cap and trade revenues, those revenues from the GGRF for public transit capital and operations programs. Now, on the next slide, you'll see how we began to make progress. So in summer, on June 24th, we saw that state leaders announced that they had reached a three-party agreement representing interest and compromise from Governor Newsom and leaders in the Senate and the Assembly that would restore what was a planned $1 billion investment from the GGRF in core programs like SB 125, TIRCP, a commitment to maintain funding for SB 125 ZETCP, and a balance of investment in our TIRCP Cycle 6. These were grant awards that were previously announced and monies that were expected by transit agencies statewide. Alongside the efforts to protect the resources that we have, there was an effort to secure still additional resources for the SB 125 program with a $2 billion request that was pursued by Senator Jesse Araguin and Assemblymember Mark Gonzalez. That ultimately resulted in the provision of a new $750 million loan to 4 Bay Area transit agencies. And then we saw an appropriation to move forward on a balance of the governor's request for CAL FIRE operating expenditures. This budget, while it made progress on a variety of our interests, did ultimately punt on the governor's proposal on cap and trade and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund expenditure plan. But we did see later this year that the governor did take action with state leaders on a cap and invest plan. The final agreement includes good news for California public transit agencies. It maintains investment in TIRCP, maintains investment in LCTOP, but it modifies how those monies will move forward in future years. Historically, we've received between 10 and 5% of total GGRF for these purposes. What we are seeing instead is a migration to fixed dollar amounts for these purposes. And so TIRCP historically has received about $300 million per year. TIRCP will, on a moving forward basis, receive $400 million a year. LCTOP has received historically about $144 million per year, and moving forward, it will receive $200 million annually. Now, what I want to highlight here is that there is, however, some new risk that is associated with the state's migration from those percentages to fixed dollar amounts. On the right hand of your screen, you'll see that the state has entered into a tiered approach to appropriation and to investment from the GGRF. We have now a set of 3 tiers. The first tier looking to provide GGRF support to backfill for lost investment, lost tax revenue rather, for a variety of purposes, including wildfire fees and green manufacturing tax credits. Tier 2 would focus the state's investment on providing a dedicated $1 billion in annual appropriation to high-speed rail and providing the legislature with a dedicated $1 billion in discretionary revenue to be directed to any number of purposes. You'll note on your screen that for the upcoming fiscal year 26-27, there was a proposed $125 million for transit passes moving forward. We'll see other such line items proposed by the legislature as part of the budget process. Now, what's operative here is that our investments, TI, RCP, and LCTOP, now in tier three. And what the state budget, what the cap and trade investment plan has identified is that it's only after tier one and tier two programs are fully funded that we would move into then funding those priorities that are identified in tier three. For that then to happen, we have to expect that the cap and trade expenditure plan will comprise of at least $4 billion. Historically, that has been within reach, but that does introduce some uncertainty into our mix, into what may be appropriations moving forward. Now, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and transition it over to my colleague Matt Robinson to take us through the sponsored and priority bills that we led on, that we engaged in, and then as we break on those items, we will be opening it up for some Q&A. So, Matt, on to you.
Thank you, Michael. And we have a number of bills to discuss with everyone today. So please hang in there. And as Brendan said at the outset, we're happy to take questions that you might have on any piece of legislation that we took positions on, sponsored, monitored, et cetera, at the end. And don't forget to use the function that's in the Zoom webinar to put those questions into the queue. But let me begin by discussing our first of three sponsored or co-sponsored bills. SB 71 was a piece of legislation authored by Senator Wiener that was signed into law by Governor Newsom not too long ago. And this should look somewhat familiar to most of you. We have been at the statutory exemptions for transit and active transportation projects for some time. SB 71 is the third iteration since 2020 that we have been involved with. We continue to modify the body of law and the Public Resources Code to do several things, and this last instance is no different. We have moved the sunset date out further to 2040 for the projects that are included in those code sections. We've expanded the project types that you all and other local agencies can use as part of those statutory exemptions to include more what I would call sort of bus type projects, including paratransit, microtransit, et cetera, shuttles. We have included ferry terminals in the law. There is some limited opportunities for tier 4 rail projects if you're building, stations or track improvements for certain rail systems in the state that are entirely powered by tier 4 locomotives. That used to be something only available to zero emission rail. And we continue to modify the processes that you all have to follow when you move forward with those CEQA exemptions. Hopefully, this will be it for a while. As I said, third time is a charm until we have to move that sunset date out. So we've bought ourselves a little bit of time. But again, another pretty big lift for the association, and just quickly thanking our co-sponsors, LA Metro, Bay Area Council, Spur, and SFMTA, who helped move this forward this year. The second bill that we set out to sponsor this year, 752 by Senator Richardson, this would have maintained the sales tax exemption, the state sales tax exemption, excuse me, for the purchase of zero emission buses. This is something that we had previously done twice with Assemblymember Mullen. Unfortunately, the fiscal situation in the state has changed significantly since we ran those earlier bills. And the deficit that Michael mentioned earlier in his slides, I think is having impact on these types of bills, including our own. We were unfortunately not able to extend the sunset further into the future. The bill was held in the the Senate Appropriations Committee due to the cost implications on the state's general fund. And while it was, I think, somewhat of a surprise that we would be stopped so early on in the process, I think the signals that we were getting from the administration, including on a bill that would have done something very similar for our state's zero emission ferry operators, which was vetoed by Governor Newsom due to cost pressures that it would have put on the state's general fund, there was a pretty good chance we might have experienced the same fate had we made it all the way to the governor's desk. His veto message has MEDOMESs, excuse me, have continued to maintain that these types of things need to be worked out as part of that annual budget process. And so our plan for 2026 is to revisit this in that budget process. And hopefully we can make some progress in rebooting, I should say, the sales tax exemption for the purchase of those zero emission buses. And then finally, our third sponsored bill, another one that was signed by the governor, AB 394 by Assemblymember Lori Wilson. This is something that through the work in our state legislative committee and our operations committee, we have been able to improve hopefully the rider and operator experience on our vehicles at our stations, our employees' experience at our vehicles at our stations, et cetera, once this bill takes effect on January 1st. But we had set out to do a number of things. We had tried to increase the penalties that currently apply for battery to include assault and stalking violations, in addition to covering more than just our bus operators or our train operators and our station agents, as it was referred to in the statute, to include all of our employees. And we were successful in getting the existing enhanced penalties for battery applied to all of our employees, but the policy committees had some issues with including assault and stalking. We'd also set out to sort of broaden the enforcement of trespass on our systems. And that was also something that the committees weren't comfortable with at the time. And finally, we had endeavored to make it a bit easier to apply prohibition orders. And we took a slightly different approach there. And what we ended up with was that, as I mentioned, higher penalties for battery against our employees across the board, and also really the clear application of existing temporary restraining order law to transit agencies, to our workforce, et cetera. And that TRO process does come with it, or bring with it, I should say, the ability to issue, or for courts to issue, stay away orders for folks that violate the law, which includes things like assault, stalking, et cetera. And we've had some agencies that have been pretty successful using those TRO statutes. And so we hope that this provides at least the clear authority for all of you that may be experiencing these unfortunate events on your systems, to look at TROs as a way to keep the bad actors out of your vehicles and off your properties. Moving along, in terms of some bills that we took positions on or were deeply involved in, the first one is SB 30. This is a bill by Senator Cortese that would have originally banned the transfer, sale, et cetera, of any diesel locomotive in California. And this came from an incident that saw a rail operator sell some of its older diesel fleets to another country, frankly, in the hopes of bringing rail transit to that country and improving its congestion, air quality, et cetera. We were opposed from the outset. We worked with our rail agencies to develop a position on the bill, as well as provide responses to committee staff, to the author's office, et cetera. And while we weren't successful in sort of stopping the bill in its entirety, we did manage to achieve a number of amendments in the legislation. And so the bill is really now limited to the transfer, sale of those Tier 0s and Tier 1 diesel-powered locomotives. However, the leasing of those vehicles is still okay under state law. So it was watered down pretty substantially by the time we made it through all of the policy committee hearings. And while we, as I said, couldn't halt the bill's progress, we do think that the work of the association and our member rail agencies was enough to sort of limit the bill's impact, if you will. SB 63, I think for our friends in the Bay Area, this is one we're all well aware of, but for folks outside of the Bay Area, this was a bill we didn't take a position on, but we did monitor it because it has significant impacts for our Bay Area operators. The bill authorizes the regional measure in the Bay Area, which, after starting with a piece of legislation last year that applied in all 9 counties and then going through the process locally and here in Sacramento, the bill was ultimately limited to 5 counties in the Bay Area that are given the authority, potentially through a citizens initiative, to place on the ballot for the voters of those 5 counties 4 half-cent sales tax measures in the counties you see listed there, and then 1 full cent in the city and county of San Francisco, which would be applied for 14 years and would be eligible or available to, as dictated specifically in the bill, a number of transit operators in the Bay Area, all of them sort of facing those fiscal cliffs, some very, very large, others perhaps more manageable, but nonetheless needed operating funding for those agencies. The bill was, as I said, about a 2-year process that all of the Bay Area operators, a lot of the county transportation authorities, local governments, MTC, et cetera, went through. And at the end of the day, with some additional, I'll say, oversight provisions in the legislation, the bill was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. And we expect, if all things go according to plan, that it could be on the November 2026 ballot. And then the last bill that I'm going to present on before I hand it off to Brendan is one that has been discussed, I'm sure, a lot since the governor signed it and probably leading up to the governor's signature, and that's SB 79 by Senator Wiener. This bill, I think, is one that you really have to dive into to understand the impacts of it. And frankly, I will just say on behalf of your association staff, we are still diving into this bill to understand the impacts of it. But on its surface, what it is doing is authorizing denser housing near certain types of transit stations. And all of that through the lens of whether or not you meet the basic test of being defined as an urban transit county, which the bill says is any county that has 15 passenger rail stations. And the author's office has, as well as the sponsors, have informed us that based on their counts, that there are 8 counties in the state of California that meet that test. And I will say that they count everything that has rail and track. I'm sorry, track and metal wheels. Rail and track, same thing. So they are counting light rail. They are counting streetcar. They are counting intercity rail. They are counting commuter rail. They are counting, I think I said light rail. So everything under the sun, as far as they're concerned, is being counted to come up with those 8 counties. And then once you establish that you are one of those 8 counties, they begin this process of establishing 2 different tiers for what they're defining as TOD areas. And those tiers those tiers bring with them different densities for the buildings that can be built within a quarter mile or a half mile, and you sort of get different requirements depending on where you're at from the center of the circle, if you will. But it is, again, it doesn't mean that just because you're one of the 8 counties, all of a sudden every rail stop in your county is eligible to have that circle drawn around it. To meet those requirements is still somewhat stringent. You have to be defined as either a very high frequency commuter rail service, which means you have 72 trains running by that station in both directions. Counting both directions every day. Or you're a high frequency commuter rail, which means you have 48. There are some additional definitions in tier 2. For example, if you have a dedicated bus line or busway or a grade separated busway with 15-minute headways, those stations would also be eligible for sort of a circle to be drawn around them, if you will. We are still, as I said, making our way through it, but what it does have the effect of doing is authorizing developers to look at those stations that are qualifying stations, and essentially, depending on how the property is zoned, commercial, mixed use, residential, they can ministerially, cite those higher density housing projects within those circles. And it gives them the ability to go up to 75 feet, 7.5 stories, and then all the way down to 55 feet or 5.5 stories. So I think a lot of folks are worried that this is going to sort of change the look and feel of neighborhoods, depending on where some of those stations are. Other jurisdictions are welcoming this as, sort of a catalyst for more dense urban development around their rail stations and their high frequency bus stations. And so it remains to be seen, the impacts of the bill. Again, we are working to try to really understand the areas where this is going to be applied. We've heard, as I mentioned, sort of different perspectives on this, and I'm sure a lot of you are hearing from your local governments about the potential impacts for pulling back planned transit service, while others may be hearing like, wait, we were left out of the bill and we want back in this thing, or we were cut out of it. So I think a lot more is to come from SB 79. As far as we know, the author is going to be doing some technical cleanup next year in 2026. And so we'll have to see, how far he's willing to go on the technical cleanup and what it means. Not so sure that someone like Scott Wiener is going to go in backwards, but perhaps there's a way to get more clarity out of some of the definitions that are in the bill, because it can be quite confusing when you dive into it, as I mentioned. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it to Brendan, who's going to run through another series of bills that we have either watched, supported, opposed, etc. And then, like I said, happy to take questions.
Hi, folks. On SB 419 by the Senate Appropriations Chair, Ana Caballero, to be brief, Matt sort of touched on this issue regarding our sponsored bill, SB 752, having to do with sales and use tax exemption for zero emission buses. This bill, as you can see, would have instituted a sales and use tax exemption for hydrogen. And the bill, as you can see, was vetoed by the governor, similar to another bill that Matt had mentioned regarding zero emission ferries last year, as the governor, dealing with a budget deficit. The governor said, we should not be dealing with this sort of impact, bill that impacts the general fund in the legislative process. It should be done through the budget process. So that was the outcome for this bill. Senate Bill 512 by Senator Perez. So, historically, of course, it has taken a 2/3 vote to raise a special tax. Obviously, that's something you folks all know. But based on a portion of a state Supreme Court ruling from about 8 years ago, and then built on over a number of other court decisions, courts have actually ruled that the 2/3 requirement does not apply to special taxes if they are undertaken by the initiative process. And so what SB 512 wanted to do, as you can see, was explicitly call out in state law that voters in a self-help district could utilize the initiative process to pass a transportation tax with just a simple majority vote. So obviously, as you can see, the bill was vetoed by the governor. He said that because of these court rulings, I believe 6 or 7 of them, right, consistently and repeatedly affirmed this authority, that the bill was unnecessary. Now, of course, just because a court has ruled a certain way does not mean that a bill is unnecessary, but those were his stated reasons. I know that there were some of our members that were, kind of excited about the possibilities that this bill presented. But, since he's vetoed it, not sure what the sort of next steps for the sponsors are. Of course, we'll keep tracking this issue in the future. Moving on to Senate Bill 667 by Senator Bob Archuleta. So this bill was in a response to some train derailments and accidents that have happened across the country in the last few years, and it would require a railroad to install and operate a network, as you can see, of wayside detector systems, and also would have capped the length of trains at 7,500 feet, ones that are operating on a main or a significant branch line. And so a number of organizations were concerned about this bill's impacts, but obviously from an association perspective, we had concerns raised by our member rail agencies, specifically on how this would impact scheduling, reliability, not to mention corresponding cost impacts. And so we in the spring, in May, engaged pretty significantly with the author's office, and we're working towards hopefully a solution, but the author actually pulled the bill from consideration in 2025, made it a 2-year bill, and wants to continue to work on it. So this is something, should he wish to move forward, we will of course continue to engage on behalf of our members. So SB 707 by Senator Durazo, pretty comprehensive reform to the Brown Act. It does really three key things. The first thing is it extends what was originally pandemic era authorization for some limited remote remote participation for your board members. And that was authorization that was going to sunset at the end of 2025. So obviously timely to try to get something passed to extend that authorization. Second, something that I know many of our agencies have expressed interest in the past is allowing subsidiary or advisory bodies that aren't taking, making official votes, taking official positions, permitting, so SB 707 would permit those bodies to meet on a remote basis, as long as they have just one physical location for folks to be able to go, and members of the public to be able to go and participate as well. And then the third portion of the bill, and probably the most significant, is having to do with remote participation for members of the public at board of directors meetings. And so it creates this category of bodies called eligible legislative bodies, and it would apply to I would say the vast majority of cities and counties, but for our purposes, of course, mostly special districts, how we would be affected. And so you can see the criteria there. If your agency falls under one of those three, so boundaries which are coterminous, meaning you share the boundaries of a county with 600,000 or more people, and your special district agency employs more than 200 full-time workers, or you can see the other two, 1,000 full-time employees, or you have revenues of $400 million and more than 200 employees. If you fall under any of those categories, you would need to provide a two-way teleconference option for members of the public to participate. And in addition, translate your agendas into languages spoken by 20% or more of your service area. And at public meetings, provide reasonable, that's the word in the law, reasonable translation requirements, or excuse me, reasonable translation assistance. And you need to do that by July 1st of 2026. So obviously, first thing to do is check to see if you are, if you fall under any of those criteria. And then should you fall under those criteria, you're going to have some new requirements that you'll have to meet. Now, as you can see, if those criteria do not apply to you and you meet in person, you would not have to offer the two-way platform. So this has been, just as I'm speaking, a bit of a convoluted bill. We've certainly been engaged on trying to make sure our members are aware and up to speed on the different requirements. Always happy to answer questions that you can reach out to me, Michael, or Matt, and we can help clarify as needed, and of course, answer any questions on this bill at the end. So moving on, Assembly Bill 476 by Assemblymember Mark Gonzalez. This is a bill that the association took a support position on. As you can see, copper metal theft having been a real increased problem for so many of our agencies around the state. This bill tries to tackle that issue, requires junk dealers, recyclers, as you can see, to collect more detailed records, open access to those records to law enforcement, increases the punishment for folks who are caught violating this. That bill was signed into law. Of course, we're happy about that and hoping that it makes an impact. And then lastly for me, before I turn it over to Michael, Assembly Bill 810 by Assemblymember Jackie Irwin. Several years ago, Assemblymember Irwin had passed a law to require cities and counties to transition their web domains to a .gov or a .ca.gov. And she wanted to, in AB 810, extend that requirement further to, as you can see, special districts, JPAs, other political subdivisions. And so that would, as you all can imagine, have caused a lot of significant cost increases for our members and other organizations members as well, and a lot of, for small agencies, et cetera. And so we took, as you can see, an opposed position on the bill, advocated with a coalition of other organizations against the bill. And that bill was, in fact, held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee in May. So that bill obviously did not proceed in 2025. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michael to discuss the last tranche of priority bills for the association.
Right, and thank you, Brendan. Members, on your screen, AB 1070 by Assemblymember Ward, a bill that we as an association opposed because it would have required your boards to look differently and your individual board members to satisfy some new base level requirements in order to receive compensation. In particular, the bill would have required that transit agency governing boards be expanded to include non-voting members representing transit labor and riders. Additionally, the bill would have required that your board members demonstrate that they have ridden public transit several times in the last month before they could receive compensation for the official duties that they oversee as members of your board. Now, as this bill was introduced, we as an association, in concert with our membership, lobbied against the bill. This was a lobbying effort directed toward its policy committee, lobbying directed toward the members of that policy committee. And ultimately, we were successful in having the author pull his bill from hearing and make that bill a 2-year bill. There are always opportunities for a 2-year bill to come back alive and move forward, but for the time being, that bill has been stopped. And so as we go on to this next bill, AB 1250 by Assemblymember Pappen, this is a bill that the association supports, and we started off with a work with author position. Now, this bill is one that looked to streamline the processes that folks with permanent disabilities must comply with in order to continue to receive access to ADA paratransit services. Now, the bill in its original form would have looked to streamline those processes by simply prohibiting you all as transit agencies from requiring individuals with permanent disabilities or permanent illnesses from being required to recertify their eligibility with your agency. Now, we're able to work with the author productively to establish instead an alternative approach that would instead limit the data that would be collected from these riders as part of the recertification process, move to make that process more streamlined by relying on teleconference, video conference, or mail-in communication. And we were ultimately able to move into a position of support on the bill due to those compromises, due to the joint approach on this bill. This bill, as it moved to the governor, was ultimately signed into law. And so in this next bill, I do want to close with a bill that we as an association oppose. It's AB 1331 by Assemblywoman Elouahi. And this is a bill that looked to prohibit employers from using surveillance tools. Think of things like workplace cameras in areas where employees would be off duty as a means of addressing privacy concerns and as a means of addressing what were for the author perceived violations from employers on the abilities for employees to rest, to have private discussions, etc. Now, the bill, unfortunately, was fairly expansive. And while there were some efforts to narrow the bill, including efforts led by business groups, ultimately, the two parties, supporters and opposition, not able to reach compromise on a path forward. And as a result, the concerns remained, primarily from those representing employers, whether they be private or public, and the bill was made into a two-year bill. And so, again, like my remarks on AB 1070, there are opportunities for two-year bills to move again. Before the current year, this bill is not moving forward. And so, as we move on, we have just one final update that we want to provide to you, and that's relative to the Transit Transformation Task Force. Folks, in this hour, and certainly within these remaining 20 minutes, we do not have an opportunity to go into full details on the two-year-long Transit Transformation Task Force process. But what we did want to highlight for you were certain high-level observations and certainly in weeks and months ahead, we'll be providing you with additional information on the Transit Transformation Task Force. For those of you who followed the history, followed the process, you'll know that this Transit Transformation Task Force was established under SB 125 as one of the accountability provisions for the provision of the $5.1 billion in emergency relief that we worked to secure for our industry. The task force was one that was convened by the CalSTA Secretary Tokso Mashakin in December of 2023 and has been meeting for the last 2 years. The task force as a whole includes 12 members that are affiliated with our association. That would include our executive committee chair, Sharon Cooney of San Diego MTS, as well as myself as your executive director. The association's engagement on the task force was principally steered by a new body that was established by our executive committee, that is our internal Transit Transformation Advisory Committee. That advisory committee comprised of 14 association members, 8 of them, the transit agency representatives on the Transit Transformation Task Force, the remaining balance of 6, pulled from our association's membership in our executive committee and our state legislative committee to ensure that as we were having internal deliberations around policy proposals we were seeing from the task force, deliberating on what we would bring ourselves as recommendations, that we were representing the geographic and modal balance of our membership. And where we are at this stage is that on September 30th, the task force held its last and final meeting for this process. And in the month that has now transpired, CalSTA is in the process of finalizing a report to be submitted to the legislature tomorrow, October 31st. We are, as an association, preparing a letter in response to, at this stage, the draft report that we've seen. We understand that we may get, as task force members, some early notice to the final report. We would be submitting our letter in response to the task force report just as the task force report is being transmitted to the legislature. And again, recognizing that we do not have time within this webinar to have a fuller discussion on this, would note that we will provide additional information to you in the weeks and months ahead. And at this time, I'll be handing it over to Brendan so that in the remaining 17 minutes or so of this webinar, we can take some Q&A from those who are with us today. And so, Brendan, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Folks, open for questions. And while we're waiting, we hope to see you next week in Long Beach at our 60th annual fall conference. Headline speaker, former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Lots of great panels and lots of folks coming, so we hope to see you there.
Yeah, and folks, as we are waiting on members to put in questions in the Q&A box, I'll expand further and say that on a number of fronts, we will be providing additional information on state and federal developments at the conference. We'll have 2 panels focused on state and federal updates respectively. Those will be updates provided not just by us as your association staff, but rather by stakeholders who have been involved in deliberations on major matters like reauthorization at the federal level, SB 79 here at the state level, and that will provide you with additional opportunities for having questions answered and for learning more from perspectives that may be different from those provided by the association. Additionally, I will highlight that we have two panels that will be providing updates on the status of our zero emission bus regulation, the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, and that will speak to how we as an association are engaged on those fronts to make the transition easier on our membership, recognizing the high cost of the transition, the fiscal challenges that you're facing as an agency. Those will be good opportunities for you to learn the latest from conversations that oftentimes happen in closed door meetings between the association and legislative and regulatory bodies, as well as in work groups that are not open to the public. And so we'll go ahead and transition back to questions. Brendan, back to you.
Thank you. First question, is there a way to inoculate transit from anti-development interests under SB 79? Pat, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's too early to tell. I mean, as I mentioned in my remarks on the bill, we kind of see both sides of the coin here in terms of, what local governments are doing in regard to SB 79. If you look at the support and opposition testimony that's listed in a lot of the analysis, I mean, it's not like you have blanket opposition from cities and blanket support from YIMBYs. I mean, you have some council members in support, you have some cities in opposition, you have some cities in support. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think what we saw, though, as the bill moved forward this year was we went from a pretty expansive list of modes, I guess, and therefore the areas in which the bill could be applied, and that got whittled down as the bill progressed. And I think the important thing to remind folks is, one, you got to qualify as a county first and foremost. We just had this confusion with one of our local agencies recently where they were like, yeah, well, anytime, anywhere we have a commuter rail station, we have X number of trains a day. Well, that's not true. You have to be one of those 8 counties first and foremost, and then you start to kind of go through the overlay. So I think it's important to remind folks that it is the busiest of the busiest transit stations in those counties that have a lot of rail. But you're not, I don't think, going to get us out of the somehow, transit is making development decisions and zoning decisions. That has been a talking point since the first legislature many years ago introduced a TOD bill around a transit station and gave away more than local zoning permitted and made it a state sort of top-down mandate. And I don't think we'll be able to inoculate, so to speak, against folks that are just dead set on their neighborhoods need to continue to look like they do currently.
Thanks, Matt. Folks, before next question, please, if you've got questions, we've got 10 minutes left. Get them in. Next question, this will be for you, Michael. Will the Transit Transformation Task Force make a recommendation for increasing state funding for transit operations?
Yeah. And thank you for the question. Here I'm going to parse my response just a bit and observe that the Transit Transformation Task Force report, as it's being delivered to the legislature, will comprise of 2 sections. The first is analysis that will take stock of the current financial and operational landscape for public transit agencies. In that analysis, there is observation and an articulation of the current state of public transit being underfunded, the need for still additional resources to move transit agencies forward toward solvency and then later toward transformation. Within the recommendations themselves, and this is the second portion, there is some language that speaks to the need for increasing state funding for transit operations. But I want to temper expectations for how far that language will go. As part of the final meeting, we, in concert with the transit advocates that are members of the task force, pushed for and secured language that speaks to the need for the state to move forward with new state funding sources to address short-term needs that's focused on agency stability, um, midterm needs that's focused on building a foundation for transformation, and then long-term needs that will drive us forward into long-term sustainability, long-term transformation. The language calls out to recommendations that were spoken to in previous years and in previous discussions of the task force. But I will note for our membership that we will not see a specific recommendation for a specific revenue mechanism or a specific dollar amount that is included as part of this report. Rather, it is language that is along the lines of a conceptual framework for investing moving forward, and then a menu of options for the legislature to consider. And so the language is in there, but again, would say that it stops short of being the full-throated call for additional resources that we had hoped to see in the report. And I'll just note for all of you, the final letter that we'll be transmitting, we'll call out our disappointment in where our recommendations have landed relative to funding and relative to one other critical area of state transit law. That's the Transportation Development Act and reforms to that body of law to carry us forward on the performance measure fronts. And so at this time, Brendan, I'll hand it back to you in the event that we have any additional questions.
Any other questions, folks?
While we're rating that, I would just mention one other thing. If all goes according to plan, next week, our executive committee will be adopting the 26th legislative program, both state and federal, and we'll get those up on the website so you all can start to peruse what we'll be working on next year as we get ready for the second year of the 2-year session.
Okay, well, seeing no further questions, want to thank you for joining us. I hope that this was informative. As always, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you've got questions. We are accessible to you and we are a resource for you. Thank you again, and we really hope to see you next week in person. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll share the PowerPoint.